The chandeliers of the Harrington Hotel glittered as though every diamond in Manhattan had been melted down and scattered across the ceiling. The annual Harrington Gala wasn't just a party, it was a throne room dressed in velvet and gold. Old money, new money, and those clawing for proximity gathered under one roof, all weighed by how loudly their surnames echoed in New York's financial district. The air carried a practiced rhythm, the laughter of families who'd never once feared exclusion, the low hum of deals whispered over champagne, and the smug ease of people convinced history would always bend in their favor. Silk gowns swayed against marble floors, polished so bright they caught the reflection of crystal glasses raised in constant toasts. Every handshake was measured, every smile a silent transaction. Here, power wasn't displayed. It was assumed. To enter this room without a legacy etched on bronze plaques meant you were no one at all. Then the entrance shifted. Two figures walked in, Darius Cole, tall in a tailored black tuxedo, his posture sharp as steel, and his wife Alana, radiant in an ivory gown that draped like it was made for her alone. They moved with calm grace, no entourage, no desperate flash, just presence. Their arrival didn't need announcement. The silence that followed them announced it for them. A ripple passed through the crowd, necklines dipped closer to murmuring mouths. "Who let them in?" hissed a woman near the grand piano. "They don't belong here," whispered a man whose cufflinks bore the crest of a family bank older than the city itself. Phones tilted slightly, discreet photos snapped. In this room, novelty wasn't celebrated, it was dissected. Darius guided Alana deeper into the hall, each step steady, unhurried. They didn't look left or right, though they could feel the scrutiny sharpen around them. A waiter paused mid-step, unsure whether to serve them. A pair of guests shifted aside as if their presence might stain the fabric of the evening. The Koi's composure only magnified the discomfort. They weren't pleading for acceptance, and that unsettled everyone who thought they set the rules. Across the room, Sterling Grant III noticed. The host of the night, heir to a dynasty that had swallowed shipping lanes, steel routes, and city contracts for generations. His tuxedo glistened under the chandeliers, his hair slicked back in a style that whispered entitlement. Sterling had built a career not by innovation, but by inheritance, and nothing provoked him more than the sight of outsiders daring to walk into his family's domain without bowing. His gaze cut through the crowd, locking on the Coles like a predator deciding whether to toy with its prey or crush it outright. The corner of his mouth tightened, just enough for his inner circle to recognize the signal. Within moments, laughter swelled louder around Darius and Alana. Small remarks sharpened, and the subtle exclusion began. A guest brushed past Alana's shoulder without apology. Another waved the waiter away when Darius reached for a glass, politeness disguised as venom. Still, the couple stood tall. Alana's eyes, bright but steady, skimmed the chandeliers instead of the ridicule around her. Darius adjusted his cufflink, unbothered, as if the room was theirs to host. That quiet composure unsettled the crowd more than any outburst ever could. If you're already gripped by how this night begins, take a moment to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your country might have its own halls like this, where arrogance dresses itself in elegance. Back at the gala, Sterling began to move. He left his circle of admirers, his polished shoes cutting across the marble like a warning bell. The crowd shifted, sensing what was about to unfold. His eyes never left the couple. The room leaned in, hungry for spectacle, and as Sterling Grant III closed the space between them, the night prepared to bare its teeth. He stopped just a breath away from Darius and Alana, lips curling into a smile that promised the first strike. Sterling's shadow fell across the polished marble before his voice carried through the hall. He tilted his glass lazily, the gesture practiced, the smirk rehearsed. "That gown," he said, eyes sweeping over Alana as if cataloging her presence. "It has a borrowed charm to it. I suppose there are shops for these occasions, aren't there?" The words landed with the sharpness of crystal breaking. A ripple of laughter darted through the nearest cluster of guests. Half amusement, half obedience. Those who chuckled weren't laughing at the remark itself, but at the unspoken order beneath it: follow Sterling's lead. To disapprove of his cruelty meant risking exile from the gilded circle that gave their lives weight. Alana stood still. Her shoulders did not dip. Her hands did not fidget. She only adjusted the edge of her gown, fingers steady against fabric that shimmered under the chandeliers. Darius's jaw flexed once, then settled. The room expected them to wither. They offered composure instead. Sterling's daughter, Chloe Grant, glided forward with a device already in hand. A sleek phone gleamed under the lights as she tapped the screen, eyes bright with the thrill of performance. "This is going to be golden," she whispered to her companion before angling the lens toward the couple. "Our little audience will adore this." Her voice rose, coated in mock sweetness. "Ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe who decided to step onto our floor tonight." She tilted the phone toward Alana, then back toward her own smirking face. "Look closely, because moments like this deserve to be shared." The chat feed lit up instantly on her screen. Guests craned their necks to catch glimpses of the scrolling comments, then laughed harder as Chloe read them aloud. "Who let them in? She's dressed like a second-hand mannequin. Wrong event, sweetheart." Laughter sharpened like glass, bouncing off chandeliers, growing louder as guests fed one another's cruelty. It was no longer whispered ridicule, but an open chorus. Chloe's live audience added fuel with every line, and she relished her role as master of ceremony. Maya's reflection threaded through the narration. In America, wealth doesn't always silence prejudice. Sometimes it funds it. Sometimes it gives it a stage and applauding hands. Darius and Alana didn't flinch. They didn't bow their heads or scramble to justify their presence. Darius's gaze lingered on Sterling for a heartbeat, calm and unbroken, before he reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. The waiter hesitated, then reluctantly handed it over. Alana accepted the glass from her husband, her fingers brushing his with the smallest, steadying touch. Their quiet refusal to shrink made the mockery ring hollower, though the guests were too committed to notice. Some smirked with exaggerated pity, others leaned closer, desperate to be captured in Chloe's live stream, their faces stamped with arrogance for the sake of digital applause. Sterling raised his voice again, making sure no corner of the hall could ignore him. "You'll find," he said smoothly, "that legacy can't be rented for the evening. It must be inherited, and some simply weren't chosen." His smile was the kind men wear when they believe cruelty is indistinguishable from charm. Gasps and chuckles mixed in the air. Chloe angled the phone closer to her father, delighted. "Oh, they're loving this," she whispered, eyes fixed on the comments exploding across her feed. Then she swung the lens back toward Alana, leaning in until her phone hovered just inches from her face. "Say something for my followers," Chloe demanded, voice dripping with taunt. "They'd love to hear how it feels to stand in a room that doesn't belong to you." The screen's glow washed across Alana's steady expression, the crowd holding its breath for her response. Chloe's phone hovered like a spotlight, its screen glowing with cruelty disguised as entertainment. She tilted it toward her own smirking face, then panned it back to Alana. "Let's see what the world thinks," she said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone certain the audience is on her side. Lines of text raced across her screen. "She looks lost. Thought this was a gala, not a clearance sale. Isn't that the staff?" The laughter in the room swelled each time Chloe read a comment aloud. Guests leaned closer, eager to be caught in the frame, their own expressions dripping with mockery. The cruelty became theater, each sneer rehearsed for the invisible crowd watching from their phones. Sterling lifted his glass high, cutting through the noise. His voice boomed across the gilded hall. "Tonight we honor heritage, true heritage, and the legacy that has carried our families forward for generations. These walls do not remember outsiders. They remember builders. They remember bloodlines." Applause followed like an obedient tide. Some guests clapped with practiced ease, their smiles wide and false. Others hesitated, their hands slower to rise, though they joined in all the same. To stay silent in Sterling's presence was to risk exile, and exile meant irrelevance. Better to clap with discomfort than to be cast aside. Maya's reflection threaded through the moment. Racism doesn't always shout, it whispers through tradition. It dresses itself in etiquette and masquerades as honor. It finds safety in words like heritage and legacy, because cruelty hidden in ceremony is harder to call out. Alana stood motionless amid the storm. The phone's glow reflected off her gown, but she did not shrink. Her face carried neither anger nor shame, only stillness, like carved stone that refused to erode under rain. Darius, beside her, took a slow sip of champagne, unbothered, as though Sterling's toast had been addressed to no one at all. Their composure unsettled the crowd. The performance had been designed to humiliate, to provoke retreat. Yet the targets of their cruelty stood firm, silent, and unbroken. That silence was louder than protest, louder than laughter. It turned the spectacle back on its authors, exposing how desperate they were to maintain control. Chloe narrowed her eyes at Alana's refusal to react. She turned the screen toward herself again, fake sympathy coating her tone. "Come on, say something for my followers. Don't be shy. They're dying to know what it feels like to stand in this room wearing." Her gaze flicked down with deliberate contempt. That. A ripple of awkwardness moved across a corner of the crowd. Not everyone laughed this time. Some shifted their weight, their eyes darting toward the exits or the chandeliers overhead. They weren't ready to defend the Coles, but they weren't entirely comfortable being seen cheering the Grants either. Sterling noticed. He raised his glass once more, forcing the rhythm back under his control. "Let us not forget," he declared, "that every great empire is built on knowing who belongs and who does not." His smile stretched wide, and the guests, conditioned to follow, applauded again. Yet not all claps were equal. A few hands met palms softly, the sound thin against the louder cheers. A fracture had appeared, barely visible, but present, and Alana's silence widened it with every second she refused to break. Near the edge of the room, two men leaned toward one another, voices low but urgent. One's brow furrowed as his gaze fixed on the Coles. "Do you know who they are?" he whispered. The words hung in the air, unheard by Sterling, but heavy enough to shift the ground beneath his polished shoes. The laughter still lingered like smoke in the air, but near the back of the room, the whispers had shifted tone. Not all eyes carried mockery anymore. Some studied the couple with sharpened focus, suspicion creeping into the polished smiles. They had seen arrogance before. It was standard currency in halls like these. But the composure of Darius and Alana Cole unsettled them in ways Sterling's insults never could. One guest leaned closer to another. "Do you know who they are?" The question spread quietly, slipping from table to table like a current beneath the noise. Because the truth was, Darius and Alana were not outsiders grasping at borrowed glamour. They were the architects of their own empire, founders of Cole Dynamics, a company that had redefined the future of clean energy. What had begun in a modest office 10 years earlier now stretched across continents, their innovations powering cities, reducing costs, and reshaping entire industries. Their net worth had surged into the billions, not by inheritance but by vision. And by work, the Grants' circle dismissed as beneath them until it became too powerful to ignore. Investors whispered that Cole Dynamics was positioned to lead the global energy market within the next decade. Governments courted them, universities honored them, and tonight, unbeknownst to Sterling, they were the guests of honor he should have been courting instead of humiliating. The irony cut deeper than champagne. For weeks, Sterling's conglomerate had been negotiating a $72 billion joint venture with Cole Dynamics, a partnership that promised to extend his family's grip into a sector he couldn't dominate alone. Every proposal, every legal draft, had pointed toward this night. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination, the handshake that sealed legacy to future. Instead, Sterling was dismantling his own lifeline with each word he spat across the floor. But he didn't know. He didn't recognize the people standing before him. Because to him, black faces in first-class spaces didn't belong unless they came with aprons or contracts for entertainment. Legacy blinded him to reality. Arrogance convinced him that anyone not cut from his family's cloth was automatically beneath it. And yet, not everyone in the hall shared his blindness. The murmurs grew heavier now, threading into pockets of silence. Guests pulled out their phones, scrolling furiously, cross-referencing names. Recognition spread like wildfire, though no one dared interrupt Sterling's performance. The more they realized who stood in front of them, the more they shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing between their host and the couple he mocked. Alana remained steady, her gown flowing around her like liquid ivory, her face unreadable. Darius stood rooted, his eyes calm, hands relaxed at his side. Neither of them rushed to reveal who they were. They allowed the silence to build, allowed the weight of Sterling's ignorance to grow heavier with every second. Because the crueler his remarks became, the more damning they would sound when the truth finally cracked open. Maya's reflection cut through. Racism thrives when arrogance mistakes silence for weakness, but silence can be strategy. Sometimes the most powerful move is to let ignorance expose itself. Sterling raised his voice again, smugness dripping from every syllable. In this hall, legacy is everything, and you, my dear, are merely guests of circumstance. His glass lifted as if crowning himself judge and jury. Around him, fewer hands clapped this time. A thin crack in the applause betrayed the unease spreading among those who knew, or were beginning to know, the truth. Chloe's live stream still rolled, comments flashing, though now a few wondered aloud who the couple actually was. And then, after letting the noise swirl one last time, Darius moved. He raised his glass, slow and deliberate, his expression calm as stone. His lips parted, steady and measured, ready to speak for the first time that evening. The room hung in silence as Darius Cole lifted his glass. His eyes met Sterling's, not with anger, not with pleading, but with a steadiness that unsettled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, and clear enough to cut through the murmurs. "We didn't come here to borrow legacy," he said, each word deliberate. "We came to build the future." The words struck harder than any raised voice could have. For a moment, even the laughter faltered. Alana's hand brushed the stem of her own glass, steady as her husband's. Together they stood, calm in the face of jeers, refusing to bend. Sterling's response came with the smirk of a man convinced the room belonged to him. He threw back his head in a laugh that echoed against marble walls. "Build the future? My boy, you're dreaming too high. This room belongs to bloodlines, not bedtime stories." The crowd chuckled on cue, eager to prove loyalty. Yet the sound lacked conviction. A few faces had grown tighter, eyes flicking from Sterling to Darius, as if they sensed something shifting beneath the surface. Chloe, never one to miss a spectacle, angled her phone closer, her painted lips curling into mockery. "Oh, this is perfect," she purred into her live stream. "Listen to this. He actually thinks he's here to build the future." She laughed, dragging out the words for her viewers as if feeding them a joke on a silver platter. But the comment feed betrayed her. What began as ridicule shifted into curiosity. "Wait, that's Darius Cole, isn't it? Hold up, I know that face. Isn't his company worth billions?" Chloe read the first few aloud, thinking they were still on her side. Her laughter faltered mid-sentence as the flood of recognition grew louder. Some of her viewers weren't mocking anymore. They were questioning, identifying, correcting her. Maya's reflection cut through the noise. Arrogance rarely sees the storm until lightning strikes. The higher it climbs on the ladder of its own pride, the blinder it becomes to the ground crumbling beneath it. Sterling, oblivious, waved a dismissive hand. "These nights are meant for men and women who carry history in their veins. Builders of tomorrow?" He scoffed. "Spare us the slogans. Wealth without heritage vanishes as quickly as champagne bubbles." His glass tipped toward the couple as if to dismiss them entirely. Darius didn't flinch. He simply set his glass back on the tray of a passing waiter and adjusted his cufflink. His silence was more commanding than Sterling's roar, his restraint heavier than the host's arrogance. Around the hall, the tension deepened. Guests whispered furiously into one another's ears. Chloe's stream kept rolling, her audience now split between loyal followers egging her on and outsiders flooding in with facts she hadn't expected. Alana's gaze moved slowly across the room. She didn't need to speak. Her dignity spoke for her. She knew the longer they stood steady, the more Sterling's cruelty revealed itself as weakness. Then, it happened. A sharp vibration broke Sterling's rhythm. He reached into his pocket, irritation flickering across his face at the interruption. The phone buzzed again, insistently this time. He glanced down, eyes scanning the screen, and for the first time that evening, the confident smirk faltered. Sterling's hand froze mid-air, his eyes narrowing as breaking news about the Coles flashed across his phone. The vibration in Sterling's pocket was more than an inconvenience. It was the first crack in the armor of his arrogance. As he glanced down, Chloe's phone continued to roll, her live stream climbing in numbers faster than she could read the scrolling comments. What began as a private gala spectacle had spilled far beyond the marble walls of the Harrington Hotel. Thousands of viewers tuned in, first for entertainment, then for outrage. Clips of Sterling's borrowed gown remark were already being clipped, shared, and dissected in real time. The chat shifted tone. Wait, that's Darius Cole. You fools, they own Cole Dynamics. That man's company powers half the East Coast grid. Check Forbes, they're billionaires, not staff. Chloe frowned as the comments poured in faster, her smirk faltering. She tried to regain control with a mocking laugh. Look at them, she said into the camera. Standing there like statues, pretending they belong. Isn't this priceless? But the viewers weren't laughing anymore. They were enraged. You're mocking billionaires who built their empire from nothing. This is racism live streamed. Your family is humiliating the very people saving your father's business. Screenshots spread like wildfire across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags surged, Cole Dynamics, Gala Racism, Grant Family Exposed. In minutes, what Chloe thought was entertainment became evidence. Inside the hall, the ripple of recognition deepened. Guests glanced at their own phones under the tables, eyes widening. A man at the bar nearly dropped his drink as he whispered to his companion, "It's true, they're worth billions." The hum of conversation shifted from mockery to unease. Laughter that had once filled the air thinned, replaced by nervous murmurs. Sterling tucked his buzzing phone away, jaw tight, trying to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. His empire's guests were already adjusting their posture, some physically stepping back to avoid being tied to his spectacle. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were calculating the cost of being seen on the wrong side of history. Maya's reflection cut through. The same mouths that cheer arrogance will abandon it the moment it threatens their own comfort. Prejudice thrives when it feels safe. But the second it risks exposure, it scrambles for distance. Alana lifted her chin slightly, her gaze sweeping the room with a quiet power that seemed to magnify as Sterling's grip slipped. She hadn't uttered a single word, yet every second she stood dignified in silence, the world outside was speaking for her. Darius's calm presence only deepened the contrast. He adjusted his cuff once more, no sign of strain in his movements. To those watching online, the image was unforgettable. A couple enduring humiliation with composure while an empire unraveled live on camera. Chloe's voice cracked as she tried to salvage her feed. "Don't listen to them," she urged her viewers, forcing a laugh. "This is just fun. You don't understand the culture of these events." But the comments had turned fully. "We understand plenty. This isn't culture. This is racism. You just destroyed your father's deal live on stream." The words stung harder than Sterling's insults. Chloe's hand trembled as she angled her phone away, but it was too late. Every sneer, every cruel remark had already been captured, replayed, and amplified. A group of investors near the center exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered harshly, "If this is true, Sterling's finished." Another stepped back entirely, signaling his driver to prepare the car. The distance between Sterling and his supposed allies grew wider by the minute. Alana's eyes locked briefly on Chloe, calm and unwavering. For the first time that night, Chloe's confidence cracked. She realized with a rush of panic that she wasn't live-streaming their humiliation. She was live-streaming her family's downfall. The room had tilted. Laughter no longer echoed as freely. The grandeur of the Harrington Gala remained. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the polished orchestral strings. But its energy had shifted. Guests who once leaned towards Sterling with worshipful smiles now held back, their eyes darting between him and the couple he had mocked. Then Darius's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression unchanged, but the message said it all. "Your stock just surged 8%. It was as though the universe itself had punctuated the moment. While Sterling tried to humiliate him in front of a room filled with wealth and influence, the markets outside were voting with confidence in Cole Dynamics. The future had already begun bending away from Sterling's hands. Across the room, a cluster of investors noticed Darius's phone glow. Their own devices vibrated seconds later, alerting them of the same news. Faces paled, eyes widened, a murmur spread like a second current, this one far more dangerous than Sterling's earlier ridicule. One investor tugged at Sterling's sleeve, whispering urgently. Another leaned in with the strained smile of someone masking panic. Sterling brushed them off at first, still clinging to the arrogance that had defined his family name. But the color drained from his face when he caught sight of his own screen. Coal Dynamics stock chart climbing like a mountain in real time. Maya's reflection cut in. Respect isn't borrowed, it's commanded. Arrogance demands it. Dignity earns it. Alana chose this moment to finally speak. Her voice was calm, steady, but strong enough to slice through the noise of crystal glasses and murmuring guests. Legacy isn't built on names, she said, her eyes on Sterling. It's built on choices. And tonight, the choice is yours, mockery or progress. The words landed heavier than Sterling expected. They weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, they were undeniable. A ripple of silence passed through the hall, followed by shifting feet and tightening jaws. For the first time, the crowd recognized that Sterling's cruelty wasn't exposing weakness in his targets. It was exposing weakness in himself. Investors moved faster now. One excused himself to make a call. Another motioned to his assistant, whispering instructions with an urgency that could no longer be hidden. The gala floor, once a theater of arrogance, was becoming a battlefield of calculations. Sterling's lips curled, desperate to maintain control. Pretty words, he muttered with a sneer. But words don't build empires. Darius looked at him then, calm as ever, his eyes steady in a way that seemed to stretch beyond the room, beyond the chandeliers, beyond the fragile arrogance of old money. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't return the insult. Instead, he lifted his phone and stepped slightly aside. A single call. No grand gesture, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet press of the screen, his voice low enough that only Alana could hear the first words. Yet the room felt it. Everyone could sense that something irreversible was set into motion. Maya's reflection closed the moment. The powerful often believe downfall arrives with trumpets, but sometimes it arrives with the soft click of a phone call. The crowd leaned in, Sterling paling further as Darius spoke into the phone, the call that would change everything. The room quieted into an uneasy hum as Darius turned slightly away from the crowd, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was steady, even casual, but its weight sent tremors through the night. Terminate the deal. 2 words, spoken softly, but they carried more force than all of Sterling Grant's mockery combined. Across the gala, investors stiffened. Those who had been whispering reassurance into Sterling's ear snapped upright, eyes darting to one another in disbelief. The deal, the $72 billion partnership Sterling had bragged about for weeks, had just been pulled from under him. Sterling forced out a laugh, the sound hollow and sharp. "Oh, please," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "A stunt. That's all this is. My family doesn't negotiate at cocktail parties." He raised his glass high, trying to rally the room back into his orbit. "Let's not mistake pride for power." But no one followed. His words fell flat, scattering on marble, with no applause to catch them. Board members exchanged glances, then began quietly excusing themselves. One slipped toward the exit, another toward the bar, phone pressed urgently to his ear. The once obedient audience was fracturing. Chloe's camera, still live, caught every movement. Her smirk had evaporated, replaced with nervous glances at the comment feed exploding across her screen. "Did you hear that? $72 gone in seconds." He just killed the deal live. Sterling's empire is collapsing on camera. She tried to angle the phone back toward herself, fumbling for control. "Don't believe everything you hear," she muttered to the live stream. But the comments drowned her out. Her followers weren't laughing anymore. They were documenting history in real time. Maya's reflection framed the moment. Racism always believes the stage is its own, but arrogance forgets the world is watching. And in the age of a camera, ignorance doesn't fade, it multiplies. Sterling's laugh cracked into something harsher, his eyes narrowing at the investors slipping away. He reached for one of them, his grip firm on a tailored sleeve. "Sit down. It's nothing, a bluff." But the man shook his head, murmuring, "We can't risk this, not tonight." For the first time, Sterling's voice strained. "You don't walk away from me. Do you hear me? You don't." Another phone rang nearby. Another investor rose, muttering apologies. The marble floor that once cleared for Sterling's stride was now clearing in retreat. His circle was crumbling, step by step, chair by chair. And still, Darius hadn't raised his voice. He tucked his phone back into his pocket, lifted his glass from a passing tray, and simply stood beside Alana. Calm, unshaken, a mirror opposite of Sterling's unraveling rage. Chloe's live stream pulsed with new comments. They're finished. Coal Dynamics doesn't need the grants. This is history. Guests who had once smirked now avoided Sterling's gaze, unwilling to be tied to his downfall. Their silence became its own indictment. The more Sterling raged, the smaller he seemed in the glare of the chandeliers. Then Alana spoke. Her voice was measured, but it carried through the hall like a verdict. She didn't raise her chin. She didn't need to. Her words carried all the authority Sterling thought he owned. "You didn't just mock us," she said, eyes locked on him. "You mocked the future." The silence that followed was louder than applause, pressing in on Sterling as though the entire hall had turned against him. The walls of the Harrington Hotel had always kept the outside world at bay. But tonight, they failed. Reporters who had been stationed near the entrance for nothing more than glossy photos of gowns and champagne toasts now scrambled with breaking alerts. Microphones lit up, cameras went live, words spread faster than the music drifting from the string quartet inside. Breaking, $72 billion deal between Grant Conglomerate and Coal Dynamics has been terminated. Exclusive, racism at the Harrington Gala? Sterling Grant caught humiliating billionaires Darius and Alana Cole. Within minutes, the headlines poured out into living rooms, boardrooms, and phone screens across the country. The story Sterling had tried to stage as a display of dominance had become evidence of his collapse, captured not by his enemies, but by his own daughter's live stream. Inside the hall, the shift was immediate. Guests who once chuckled at Sterling's barbs now adjusted their coats, gathering clutches and muttering excuses as they slipped toward the exits. What had begun as mockery was now chaos, disguised in polite footsteps. Laughter was gone. The air hummed with discomfort and panic. A waiter abandoned a tray mid-floor. A pianist faltered mid-note, hands stiff as the murmurs drowned the melody. The chandeliers still glistened above, but their glow no longer crowned Sterling's arrogance. It illuminated his unraveling. Phones buzzed from every corner of the hall. Investors scrolled furiously, pale as they watched stock tickers flash red. The Grant Conglomerate, once untouchable, was free-falling in after-hours trading. Billions evaporated in seconds. By midnight, the losses would carve holes in portfolios and headlines alike. Maya's reflection cut through. Entitlement is loudest before it crumbles. It shouts, it mocks, it parades itself across marble floors. But when collapse comes, it doesn't roar. It whimpers beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Sterling tried to rally the room, voice sharp, almost frantic. "This is nothing but theater. They're nobodies dressed in tailored suits, and you all know it." His words cracked, desperation replacing confidence. But no one followed. His board members, once loyal shadows, slipped out quietly, avoiding his eyes. Their exits were not loud, but they were final. The floor that had cleared for him at the start of the night was now emptying by the second. Chloe's phone still streamed, the comments relentless. Stock tanking live. "This is the end of the grants. Coal Dynamics just won." She tried to angle the lens away from her father's flailing figure, but it was too late. Every second was being archived, shared, replayed. Alana stood silent, her eyes steady on the man unraveling before her. Darius adjusted his cufflink again, a gesture of quiet control that only deepened the contrast between their dignity and Sterling's collapse. They didn't need to shout. The room was already speaking for them. A guest brushed past Sterling, muttering, "We can't be tied to this," before vanishing into the night. Another pulled his wife by the hand, refusing to meet Sterling's glare. With every step away, his empire shrank. And then, stripped of allies, stripped of applause, Sterling turned back to the man who had never raised his voice. His stride was stiff, his face flushed, his eyes burning with desperation. He crossed the marble floor once more, but this time not as a conqueror. Sterling stopped in front of Darius, voice low, almost broken. "Don't do this. You don't know what you're starting." Sterling's shoes scraped against the marble as he halted in front of Darius. His once polished smile was gone, replaced with a tight grimace that betrayed the panic beneath his skin. He lowered his voice at first, trying to mask desperation with civility. "Darius," he began, forcing the name as though it tasted sour, There's no need for this to get out of hand. You're angry, I get it. People say things at galas, thoughtless things. Let's be men about it, shake hands, and move forward. Darius met his gaze with calm that unnerved the crowd. We don't fight battles with fists, he said evenly. We end them with contracts. The words silenced even the clinking of glasses. Investors who lingered at the edges leaned in. The weight of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Sterling's jaw tightened. The plea in his voice hardened into threat. You think you can walk into my hall and humiliate me? You think you can just pull 72 billion from the table without consequences? Be very careful. My family doesn't forget. We make examples. Darius didn't flinch. Your family doesn't own the future, and your threats are relics of a world that's slipping through your hands. Chloe's phone shook slightly as she tried to control the live stream. Her voice cracked with false cheer. Everyone, you're seeing this out of context. My father this isn't what it looks like. She forced a laugh, her eyes darting nervously to the scrolling comments. But the comments shredded her attempt at control. Too late. We saw everything. Your family humiliated billionaires on camera. Stop spinning. We don't buy it. Her smile faltered as wave after wave of condemnation filled the screen. What was meant to be entertainment had become evidence, and her own followers were testifying against her family in real time. Sterling's voice rose, anger breaking through the facade. You'll regret this, he spat. Every bridge you think you've built will burn. People in this room know where power lies. He turned to the audience as though begging for applause, but silence answered him. Then Alana spoke. Her words were calm, yet sharper than any insult Sterling had thrown all evening. Power isn't in the room, Sterling. Power is in the choices we make when the world is watching. And tonight, everyone is watching. The hall seemed to freeze. Her quiet dignity stood taller than Sterling's rage, her voice steady where his cracked. Guests who had once whispered behind jeweled glasses now looked at her with something that hovered between respect and awe. Sterling's face reddened. He spun toward his investors, hoping to find support, but the final blow came instead. One of the senior partners stepped forward, voice firm. We're moving our shares to the Coles, effective immediately. Another investor nodded. We can't afford to stand with you, not after this. The murmur solidified into declarations. Phones lit with sell orders. Sterling's empire, built on arrogance and exclusion, began to collapse before his eyes. The marble floor that once parted for his stride now felt like it was tilting beneath him. Maya's reflection closed the moment. Racism believes legacy makes it invincible, but arrogance is the easiest empire to topple. Sterling staggered back as one voice after another confirmed what he feared most. Investors siding with the Coles, his dynasty disintegrating in the span of a single evening. History has a way of dressing prejudice in fine clothes. Racism rarely calls itself by name in halls like the Harrington Gala. Instead, it cloaks itself in talk of heritage, legacy, and tradition, words polished to hide the exclusion beneath them. Tonight was no different. Sterling Grant believed his tuxedo and dynasty could shield him, that arrogance disguised as culture would always win applause. But the world was watching, and arrogance had finally met its reckoning. The Coles never raised their voices. They didn't storm out, didn't trade insult for insult. They let their silence, their composure, and their truth speak louder than Sterling's empire ever could. And that restraint became the weapon that undid him. When news broke of the canceled $72 billion deal, Coal Dynamics became more than a company. It became a symbol. Headlines praised Darius and Alana not only for their innovations in clean energy, but for standing with dignity in the face of humiliation. Governments renewed contracts. Universities hosted conferences bearing their names. Their stock surged to historic highs. Around the world, their story became evidence that prejudice can be resisted not only with anger, but with calm defiance that exposes its cruelty for what it is. Meanwhile, Sterling Grant was reduced to a cautionary tale. Once celebrated as the heir of a dynasty, he became the face of arrogance undone by racism. His empire fractured as investors fled. His name, once tied to power, was now tied to disgrace. The very speech he had given about bloodlines and heritage was replayed across every network, not as proof of strength, but as evidence of his downfall. Maya's reflection wove through the aftermath. Racism is not always shouted from the streets. Sometimes it's whispered behind crystal glasses, hiding in laughter meant to wound. But dignity has its own language, and when spoken firmly, it outlasts dynasties. The Coles didn't just walk away from Sterling. They walked into history. Their innovations promised a cleaner, brighter world, and their composure promised something even greater, that the future doesn't belong to arrogance. It belongs to those who refuse to be diminished by it. Yet, the question lingers like an echo against marble walls. What if the Coles had stayed silent? What if dignity hadn't spoken at all? Some stories don't end with applause. They end with silence, the kind that lingers long after the last insult has been thrown. What happened at the Harrington Gala was not just a clash between two families. It was a mirror held up to a society where racism doesn't always arrive in rags or shouts. Sometimes it wears tuxedos, smiles through polished teeth, and calls itself heritage. Sterling Grant believed power could be secured by exclusion, that mocking others would reaffirm his dynasty's throne. But power built on exclusion is fragile. It cracks the moment it is tested, because arrogance has no foundation. The Coles didn't need to shout. They didn't need to strike back with rage. Their silence, their composure, their refusal to be diminished, that was the answer. History will remember Sterling not for his wealth, but for his downfall. And it will remember Darius and Alana Cole for something far greater, for showing that dignity lasts longer than dynasties. They proved that one calm voice can silence a room full of arrogance, that one steady gaze can expose centuries of prejudice, and that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply standing tall. Poetic closure came in the truth no one in that hall could deny. Sterling thought he held power. What he held was the match that burned his empire. Now the question is yours. What would you have done in Darius and Alana's place? Drop your thoughts below. We want to hear them. And let us know where you're watching from by leaving your country flag in the comments. Stories like this echo across borders, and your voice matters. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Because in a world where prejudice still wears fine clothes, stories like this remind us, dignity is priceless.